Dobro. History. Archive.
All right, today we're opening up a historical cold case file, one that has absolutely captivated people for over 200 years, the death of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. This is the central question, right? It's the one that's fueled plays and movies and just endless speculation. We have this story of genius cut short, of a bitter rivalry, of a dark conspiracy. But is any of it actually true? Okay, let's dive into this. So, picture this. Vienna, 1791. The official record says he died of severe miliary fever, but on the streets, the rumor mill was already churning. The whispers said, poison. You have to remember, this was a city on edge, full of political anxieties, spies. In that kind of atmosphere, the idea that a genius could just die seemed impossible, and that vacuum was instantly filled with conspiracy. To find the truth, we have to do what any good investigator does. We've got to set aside all the drama, all the theatrics, and just start with the primary evidence. And in this case, that means Mozart's body and the timeline of his final, agonizing days. You know, the first myth we can just toss right out the window is this idea of a long, slow decline. The timeline tells a totally different story. Look at this. He's working, he's socializing, he's celebrating the success of his new opera. Then, bam, November 20th, it hits him. His illness wasn't some gradual fade. It started abruptly, and it got serious. Fast. Terrifyingly fast. Okay, this right here is where the whole poison theory really starts to unravel. It's a complete clinical mismatch. The legend says the weapon was Aqua Tofana, this infamous poison. But its arsenic-based symptoms, horrible stomach issues, burning pain, delirium, they just don't line up with what eyewitnesses described. Mozart's actual symptoms were a high fever, a rash all over his body, and this severe, immobilizing swelling. And here's the key. He was lucid, he was clear-headed, almost right up to the very end. The facts just don't support the story. So if it wasn't poison, what in the world was it? While medical historians now point to a far more plausible and, honestly, a tragically common culprit. It's called post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. I know, it's a mouthful. But the idea is actually pretty simple. The poison was internal. His own immune system, overreacting to a simple strep infection, literally turned on his own body and attacked his kidneys. So you see the crucial point here? Mozart wasn't the victim of some grand conspiracy. He was a casualty of the world he lived in. He probably caught strep throat during a small epidemic in Vienna, his immune system went into overdrive, his kidneys failed, and then, in a tragic twist of irony, the very doctors trying to save him likely delivered the final blow with a common practice of the day, bloodletting. So, with the murder weapon officially debunked, let's move on. Let's look at the circumstances that provided the perfect fuel for these conspiracy theories, starting with his famous final work, the Requiem. I mean, come on. This is the Gothic centerpiece of the entire myth, right? It's been immortalized in movies and books for a reason. It's just such a powerful, chilling image, a supernatural messenger showing up to commission Mozart to write the music for his own funeral. But the reality? Well, it was a whole lot more boring. The masked messenger was just a steward working for an eccentric nobleman, a guy named Count von Walsegg. And this count had a weird habit of commissioning music from famous composers and then passing it off as his own work. So the whole thing was just a deceptive but ultimately mundane business deal to commemorate the count's late wife, not a supernatural summons from the grave. And this is where we uncover the real conspiracy surrounding the Requiem. And it wasn't about murder, it was about money. Mozart died, leaving it unfinished. His wife, Constanze, was facing total financial ruin, so she had his student secretly finish it and then forge Mozart's signature on the final piece. It was a desperate, but you have to admit, a pretty brilliant act of commercial survival. Now, I want you to look at this number for a second. 85%. Just let that sink in. That is the percentage of Vienna's entire population that was buried in the exact same type of common grave as Mozart. The image we all have of a destitute Mozart being dumped unceremoniously into a pit during a raging blizzard, it's powerful, but it's a complete fabrication, basically designed to make the tragedy seem even bigger. The truth is, he received a standard third-class burial, just like most of the middle class in Vienna. The simplicity wasn't because he was broke, it was dictated by law. And that famous blizzard? Yeah, weather records show it was a calm, misty day. And all of this, of course, brings us to the man at the very center of the conspiracy, the villain of this story for over 200 years, the imperial Kapellmeister, Antonio Salieri. The narrative is just so compelling, isn't it? A hardworking but, mediocre court musician, consumed by jealousy, who destroys a God-given genius. This whole story is built on rumors of rivalry and a supposed deathbed confession Salieri made when he was old and suffering from dementia. But what does the evidence from 1791 actually tell us? This is from Mozart himself. These are his own words. Just weeks before he died, he personally took his supposed mortal enemy to see his new opera. And he writes home with pride about how much Salieri loved it, shouting bravo. This letter shows professional respect, even admiration, not lethal hatred. But honestly, maybe the most compelling piece of evidence isn't from a letter at all. It's an action. And it comes from the person who knew Mozart best and had the most to lose, his wife, Constance. It really all comes down to this one simple question. And the answer is, she dead. This is, for me, the most psychologically persuasive evidence of all. Years after Mozart's death, Constanza Mozart entrusted her own son's musical future to Antonio Salieri. It is just inconceivable that she would do that if she had even the slightest suspicion that he had murdered her husband. Her actions speak so much louder than 2 centuries of rumors ever could. So, after examining the body, the circumstances, and the prime suspect, what is the final verdict in this historical cold case? So let's just lay it all out, the final accounting. Across every single category, the romantic myth just completely collapses under the weight of historical and medical evidence. The poisoning, the pauper's grave, the jealous rival, the supernatural requiem, one by one, it all turns out to be fiction. And this leaves us with one last, really provocative thought. The myth of Mozart and Salieri endures, not because it's true, but because it feels true. It gives a grand, tragic meaning to what was, in reality, a random, senseless death. We prefer the story of a genius murdered by mediocrity because the alternative, that a titan of culture could be taken down by something as mundane as a common bacterial infection, is almost too ordinary, maybe even too frightening for us to accept.